I welcome you to my channel. Subscribe and listen to my new stories every day. I met Julia at a company picnic 15 years ago, back when life felt like a wide-open highway with nothing but promise ahead. She was the new account manager at the time, dazzling the crowd with her quick wit and magnetic charm. I was just another engineer, more comfortable tinkering with machines than mingling with people. But Julia had a way of pulling you in, making you feel like the only person in the room. It didn't take long for us to fall in love. Within a year, we were married, sharing dreams of a happy life, a cozy home, and a family. Those dreams came true, or so it seemed. Our life together unfolded in predictable perfection, 2 beautiful kids, a charming suburban house, and a marriage that, to outsiders, looked like a picture postcard. But even the strongest walls have cracks, invisible to the naked eye. It started with the phone. Julia had always been an open book, her phone lying on the counter or in the living room, free for either of us to use. Then, a few months ago, she became oddly protective of it. It was never out of her sight, always face down or in her hand. When I'd ask to borrow it, she'd brush it off with a breezy, "Oh, I just need it for work." I didn't think much of it at first. She had a demanding job, after all. Pharmaceutical sales was a high-pressure world of client dinners and tight deadlines. But soon, there were other signs. Late-night texts she dismissed as work emergencies, phone calls taken in hushed tones behind closed doors, and an increasing number of overnight trips that didn't quite add up. Still, I told myself not to jump to conclusions. Julia had always been ambitious, and her career had been taking off lately. More travel meant more opportunities for us as a family, better schools for the kids, more financial security. I had no reason to suspect her, no proof to fuel my growing unease. Until the Wawa incident. We were driving up to the mountains for a long overdue family vacation when Julia asked to stop for a bathroom break. I pulled into a Wawa off the highway, and she hopped out, leaving her phone on the passenger seat. While she was inside, it buzzed, lighting up the car with an incoming message. I glanced at it without thinking, my eyes catching the name on the screen, Mark. The message was innocuous enough, just a single line of text, "Can't wait to see you again." My stomach nodded, but before I could think, the convenience store doors flew open, and Julia came sprinting back to the car. Not walking, not jogging, sprinting. She yanked the door open, grabbed the phone from the seat, and gave me a nervous smile. "Forgot my phone," she muttered, slipping it into her pocket as she headed back into the store. Her behavior was so out of character, so wildly un-Julia, that I didn't even question her. I sat there, stunned, as a wave of doubt washed over me. Was I reading too much into it? Was it just a work colleague? The nagging voice in my head wouldn't let it go. Our vacation was a blur. Julia was on her phone constantly, claiming she was catching up on urgent projects. The kids seemed happy enough, oblivious to the tension building between us. I tried to ignore it, to focus on the fresh mountain air and the laughter of my children. But the message, the sprint, and her evasive behavior lingered like a shadow. When we got back home, I decided to investigate. I wasn't proud of it, but I needed answers. That night, after Julia went to bed, I waited for her to fall asleep and slipped downstairs. Her laptop was open on the kitchen counter, the screen glowing softly in the dark. I knew her password, it was the same one she'd used for years. At first, there was nothing unusual. Work emails, project updates, a handful of messages from colleagues. But then, buried deep in a folder labeled personal, I found the emails. Dozens of them, exchanged over the past 6 months with someone named Mark. They started out professional enough, but as I scrolled further, the tone shifted. Inside jokes. Flirty banter. Lines like, "Last weekend was amazing. Can't wait for the next trip." My hands shook as I read them. My wife, the woman I'd built my life with, was having an affair. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut, stealing the air from my lungs. I closed the laptop, my mind racing. Confronting her now would only lead to a fight, and I needed more than emails if I was going to unravel this. Over the next few days, I dug deeper. I checked our credit card statements, noting charges for hotels and restaurants in cities Julia had never mentioned visiting. I scoured the calendar she kept in our home office, cross-referencing it with her supposed work trips. The picture became clearer with each passing day. Julia's conferences and client meetings were cover stories, carefully constructed lies to hide her time with Mark. But instead of anger, I felt a strange, cold calm settle over me. If Julia wanted to play games, I'd play too. But this time, I'd make sure I was the one holding the cards. And I wasn't planning to fold. After discovering Julia's betrayal, a part of me wanted to confront her immediately, to demand answers, to yell and scream until she admitted what she'd done. But another part, the more calculating, pragmatic side, told me to wait. Confrontation would only lead to denial or half-truths. If I wanted to see this through, I needed proof. Ironclad, irrefutable proof. I spent the next week quietly collecting evidence. It wasn't hard, really. Julia was careless, too comfortable in the belief that her lies would never catch up with her. Her laptop held a treasure trove of details, confirmation emails for flights, hotel bookings, even a receipt for a dinner for two at an upscale restaurant in Chicago during one of her conferences. But the emails were the real goldmine. Their exchanges grew more intimate as I read further back. Phrases like, "I miss you already," and "can't wait to feel your arms around me again," made my stomach churn, but I forced myself to push through. Painful as it was, every message I read fortified my resolve. Mark, I discovered, wasn't just some random colleague. He was a regional manager for one of Julia's pharmaceutical clients, stationed in Chicago. They'd met at a conference over a year ago, and according to the emails, their affair had started shortly afterward. I could see how it happened. Mark seemed charming, attentive, everything Julia had once said she loved about me. But charm fades, and truth cuts deeper than any fleeting attraction. The more I learned about Mark, the more determined I became to dismantle this fantasy they'd built together. One evening, while Julia was out on another late-night meeting, I called in reinforcements. My best friend, Mike, had been my confidant since college. He was blunt, loyal, and, most importantly, discreet. "You're sure about this?" he asked, sipping a beer on my back porch as I laid out the details. "Positive," I said, sliding a folder across the table. Inside were printouts of the emails, receipts, and photos I'd managed to obtain. Mike thumbed through the folder, his expression darkening. "Jesus, Adam. This is a lot." "Yeah," I said, staring into the yard where the kid's swing set swayed gently in the breeze. "I'm not proud of how deep I've had to dig, but I need a plan." Mike set the folder down, his brow furrowed. "You don't just want a divorce, do you?" "No," I said, my voice steely. "I want her to understand what she's done. To see the consequences of her choices. She doesn't just get to walk away from this unscathed." Mike leaned back, nodding slowly. "All right. What do you need from me?" The next step was harder, a conversation with a lawyer. I reached out to a family law attorney recommended by a colleague. Her name was Lisa, and she had a reputation for being both sharp and ruthless. After reviewing the evidence I'd gathered, she laid out my options. "With what you have," Lisa said, tapping the folder on her desk, "you'll come out ahead in any divorce proceedings. Custody of the kids, the house, hell, you might even get alimony if you wanted it." "I don't care about the money," I said. "I just want to protect my kids and make sure Julia can't spin this into something it's not." Lisa nodded. "Understood. But I have to ask, are you sure you're ready for what comes next? This won't be pretty, Adam. Affairs never are." "I'm ready," I said firmly. And I meant it. With my legal ducks in a row, I turned my attention to the next phase of my plan. Julia's birthday was coming up, and she'd mentioned wanting to host a small dinner party with close friends and family. At first, I considered shutting it down, refusing to entertain the charade. But then, a better idea took shape. If Julia wanted to pretend everything was fine, I'd let her. For one last night. The week leading up to the party was surreal. Julia acted as though nothing had changed, chatting about decorations and menus as if she weren't sneaking off to be with another man. I played along, offering suggestions and helping with preparations. The kids were excited, too, oblivious to the storm brewing beneath the surface. On the night of the party, our home was filled with laughter and warmth. Julia looked radiant, her smile wide as she moved through the room, greeting guests and pouring wine. I watched her closely, marveling at how effortlessly she wore the mask of a devoted wife and mother. But beneath the surface, cracks were forming. Midway through the evening, I stood to make a toast. The room quieted as I raised my glass, a warm smile plastered on my face. Thank you all for coming tonight to celebrate Julia's birthday. She's an incredible woman, a wonderful mother, a dedicated professional, and, for the past 14 years, the love of my life. Julia beamed, her cheeks flushing pink as our guests clapped and cheered. I waited for the noise to die down before continuing. I'd like to take this moment to express my gratitude, not just for Julia, but for all of you, our friends and family, who have supported us over the years. It's rare to find such loyalty and honesty in this world. My voice hardened slightly, though I kept my smile intact. And those qualities deserve to be celebrated. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small envelope, holding it up for everyone to see. Inside this envelope is a little tribute to loyalty. Julia, would you do the honors? Her smile faltered slightly as she took the envelope from my hand. She glanced at me, then at the crowd, before opening it. The color drained from her face as she pulled out the contents, a series of photos, emails, and receipts, all carefully arranged to tell the story of her affair. The room fell silent, the festive atmosphere evaporating in an instant. Julia's hand trembled as she stared at the evidence, her eyes wide with panic. Adam, she began, but I cut her off. You don't have to say anything, I said calmly, addressing the room. I just thought it was important for everyone to see what loyalty doesn't look like. The silence was deafening. Julia's parents exchanged horrified glances, while our friends shifted uncomfortably in their seats. I let the moment stretch, savoring the weight of it. Thank you all for coming, I said finally, setting my glass down. The party's over. And with that, I walked out of the room, leaving Julia to face the wreckage of her carefully constructed facade. The aftermath of the party was like watching a bomb explode in slow motion. I didn't stick around to see Julia's reaction, I'd said my piece and left her to pick up the shards of her double life. As I walked out of the living room and into the quiet of the night, I felt a strange calmness settle over me. For months, I had carried the weight of suspicion, heartbreak, and anger, and now, finally, the burden had shifted. It wasn't mine to carry anymore. The kids were with my sister that evening, an arrangement I'd made under the guise of letting Julia enjoy her birthday without distractions. In truth, I wanted them far away from the fallout. As I drove to pick them up, I rehearsed the conversation I knew was coming. I wasn't ready to explain everything to Emma and Jack, but I also couldn't shield them from the reality of what was happening. When I walked into my sister's house, the kids were curled up on the couch, watching a movie. Emma, 12, looked up and smiled. Hey, Dad. Did Mom's party go okay? I forced a smile, nodding. It went fine, sweetheart. Ready to head home? Jack, 8, groaned, clearly not ready to leave. Do we have to? Aunt Lisa made brownies. Lisa appeared in the doorway, a tray of brownies in her hands. He's not lying, she said with a smirk. You sure you don't want to hang out for a while? Thanks, but we'd better get home, I said. It's been a long night. Lisa's smile faded as she handed Jack a brownie and motioned for me to follow her into the kitchen. Once we were out of earshot, she turned to me, her brow furrowed. How bad was it? I sighed, leaning against the counter. Worse than I thought it would be. She didn't even try to deny it. Lisa shook her head. What's your plan now? Get through the next few days, I said. I've already spoken to my lawyer. Julia doesn't know it yet, but I'm filing for divorce on Monday. Lisa's expression softened. You know you can count on me, right? Whatever you need. Thanks, I said, squeezing her hand. I'll let you know. When we got home, the house was dark. Julia's car was still in the driveway, but she was nowhere to be found. I guessed she'd retreated to the guest room or gone for a drive to clear her head. Either way, I didn't care. I put the kids to bed, kissed them goodnight, and then locked myself in the master bedroom. For the first time in weeks, I slept soundly. The next morning, I found Julia in the kitchen, nursing a cup of coffee. Her face was pale, her eyes red and puffy. She didn't look up as I entered the room, but her voice was quiet and trembling. Adam, we need to talk. I opened the fridge, grabbed a bottle of water, and leaned against the counter. Go ahead. She hesitated, staring into her coffee as if it held the answers she couldn't find. I know I've hurt you, she said finally. And I know I've made mistakes. But. Mistakes? I interrupted, my voice sharper than I intended. Is that what you call it? Her head snapped up, her eyes wide with a mixture of guilt and desperation. I didn't mean for it to happen. I never wanted to hurt you, Adam. I laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. That's funny, because from where I'm standing, it looks like you went out of your way to do exactly that. She flinched, tears spilling down her cheeks. Please, just let me explain. I folded my arms, waiting. Go on. Julia took a shaky breath. It started last year. Mark he was there for me when I felt like you weren't. You've been so distant, so wrapped up in work and the kids and. Oh, so it's my fault, I said, my tone icy. Classic. Go on, Julia. Tell me how sleeping with another man was the logical solution to whatever problems you thought we had. I'm not blaming you, she said, her voice breaking. I'm just trying to make you understand. I love you, Adam. I never stopped loving you. I shook my head, incredulous. You've got a funny way of showing it. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The weight of everything unsaid hung between us, heavy and suffocating. Finally, I pushed off the counter and headed for the door. This conversation is over, I said. I'll be staying with Mike for a few days. The kids are staying here with you, but I expect you to be honest with them when they ask why I'm not here. Adam, wait. I stopped, turning to face her. Monday morning, I'm filing for divorce. You can keep the house, but the kids stay with me. I'm done, Julia. Leaving the house felt like a weight lifting off my chest. I drove aimlessly for a while, trying to process the confrontation. Her tears, her excuses, her empty declarations of love, it all felt like noise, meaningless and hollow. By the time I pulled into Mike's driveway, I felt clearer, lighter. He opened the door before I could knock, a six-pack of beer in one hand and a knowing look on his face. You okay? He asked. No, I admitted. But I will be. Mike stepped aside, letting me in. Come on. Let's figure out what's next. For the next few days, I stayed at Mike's, giving Julia space to process and myself time to plan. I kept in touch with the kids, calling them every night to check in. They didn't ask too many questions. Emma was old enough to sense that something was wrong, but Jack seemed blissfully unaware. For that, I was grateful. On Monday morning, I met with Lisa to finalize the divorce papers. Everything was laid out clearly: primary custody of the kids, the house in Julia's name, and a detailed visitation schedule. I wasn't interested in dragging things out, I just wanted it to be over. When I handed Julia the papers that evening, she broke down completely. She begged, pleaded, swore she'd do anything to fix things. But it was too late. The damage was done, and there was no going back. "This isn't just about what you did to me," I said, my voice steady. "It's about what you did to our family. To the kids. I can't forgive that, Julia. And I won't." She sobbed as I walked out the door, but I didn't look back. For the first time in months, I felt free. 2 months after I handed Julia the divorce papers, life had fallen into a strange, hollow rhythm. The kids had settled into the new arrangement surprisingly well, though I could see traces of confusion and sadness in their eyes whenever they asked why Mom and Dad didn't live together anymore. I told them what I thought they needed to hear, that their mom and I both loved them, but we couldn't stay married. It was the truth, but not the whole truth. They didn't need to carry the weight of my heartbreak. Julia, for her part, had been a ghost. She moved out of the house into a small apartment on the other side of town. She saw the kids during her scheduled visitations, but each exchange was stilted, painfully formal. I wanted to be angry with her, to hate her for what she'd done, but seeing her so diminished, her spark gone, her confidence shattered, only left me with pity. The house felt too quiet now. The laughter and chaos that had once filled every corner were replaced by the low hum of appliances and the occasional creak of the floorboards. Even the kids' chatter seemed muted, their voices lacking the exuberance they once had. I busied myself with work, soccer practices, and late-night projects in the garage. Anything to avoid the emptiness that seemed to creep closer every day. One Friday evening, as I finished sanding a section of the Mustang's hood, my phone buzzed on the workbench. It was Emma. "Dad, Mom's not answering," she said, her voice small and uncertain. "She was supposed to pick us up an hour ago." A knot tightened in my chest. "Did you try calling her?" "Yeah, but it keeps going to voicemail." I checked the time. Julia was never late for her visitations, and though I doubted her reliability in many things, she never missed a chance to see the kids. "All right," I said. "Stay put. I'll call her and figure out what's going on." After hanging up with Emma, I dialed Julia's number. It rang and rang before going to voicemail. I tried again with the same result. My unease deepened. Something wasn't right. 15 minutes later, I was parked outside Julia's apartment complex. The lights in her unit were off, and her car was nowhere to be seen. I called again, my hands trembling as the phone buzzed in my ear. When she didn't answer, I got out of the car and went to her door, pounding until my knuckles hurt. "Julia!" I shouted. "Are you in there?" No answer. A neighbor poked their head out of the door across the hall. "Hey, you looking for Julia?" "Yeah," I said, swallowing hard. "Have you seen her today?" The man shook his head. "Not since yesterday. She didn't look so good then, though. Real pale, kinda shaky." My stomach sank. "Did she say anything? Did she seem upset?" He shrugged. "Not really. Just looked tired. Hope she's okay." I drove to the places she might have gone, the park she liked to visit, the cafe she'd mentioned in passing, even the office she used to work at. But there was no sign of her. As the hours dragged on, a terrible thought began to take shape in my mind, one I didn't want to acknowledge but couldn't shake. I called the police. It was nearly midnight and my worst fears were confirmed. Julia's car had been found at the edge of a wooded area on the outskirts of town. The officer on the phone said little, but his tone spoke volumes. I drove to the scene in a daze, my mind racing with fragmented thoughts and memories. When I arrived, the flashing lights of patrol cars and an ambulance illuminated the otherwise dark stretch of road. An officer met me as I approached, his face solemn. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "We found her in the woods." I stared at him, uncomprehending. "She's..." He nodded. "She's gone." The details came later. Julia had left a note in the car, a short, rambling apology that mentioned the kids and her regret for the choices she'd made. The guilt, it seemed, had been too much for her to bear. The officer handed me the note, but I couldn't bring myself to read it, not then. I stood in the cold night air, staring at the empty car, my chest hollow. Julia was gone. The woman who had betrayed me, broken our family, and left me in pieces was gone. And with her passing came a tidal wave of grief I hadn't anticipated. I thought I had stopped loving her. I thought I had buried those feelings alongside the trust she'd shattered. But standing there, I realized that some part of me still cared, still wanted her to find happiness, redemption, or at least peace. Now, all of that was gone. The weeks that followed were a blur. I explained Julia's death to the kids as gently as I could, though no words could soften the blow. Emma cried for days, while Jack retreated into himself, his once bright spirit dimmed. I threw myself into being there for them, trying to fill the void Julia had left, but it was impossible. Her absence was a chasm, deep and unyielding. Late at night, when the kids were asleep, I found myself reading her note. The words blurred as tears filled my eyes, but one sentence stood out: "I'm sorry for everything. I wish I could undo it all." It wasn't enough, but it was all she had left to give. In the end, there were no victors in our story. Julia's betrayal had destroyed our marriage, and her death had left scars that would never fully heal. The house, once a symbol of our shared dreams, became a haunting reminder of what we had lost. I sold it a year later, moving the kids to a smaller place closer to my sister. Life went on, as it always does, but the weight of Julia's absence lingered. On some nights, I'd sit alone and wonder what might have been, if I could have forgiven her, if she could have redeemed herself, if we could have found a way back to the life we once had. But those questions had no answers. All that remained was the echo of a love that had burned too brightly and ended far too soon.